Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Cantina Talano lovers. I would love to be sitting there with you in your kitchen, garden, maybe it's a little bit too chilled outside for the garden right now, or in your living room to taste the wines of Cantina Talano with you. But I had to invite you to the tasting room of Cantina Talano where I am sitting right now. My name is Julia Springeth. I've been working for Cantina Talano in the marketing and sales department for about 5 years now. And usually I would be traveling around the world and I would be there, right there in the wine shop around the corner in order to present the wines to you, and different times, different methods. So we caught the opportunity to record a video. So when you open this tasting box of Cantina Talano, you know exactly what you have in your glass. So before we start trying the wines, and honestly, you can start pouring. It is 9 a.m. here at Talano, so I'm actually already looking forward to try the first Pinot Bianco because it always wakes me up a little bit. But you can start pouring whatever wine you would love to start with. And but I want to make sure that you know where these wines are coming from and why we're focusing on these wines. So many of you might say now, I know exactly where alto-adige is located because you were driving through on your way to Lago di Garda, maybe, or maybe you stopped here in alto-adige. For the others, alto-adige is, or Südtirol, how we call it, is the northernmost region in Italy. And we are located in the middle of the Alps, which makes it pretty clear why we focus a lot on white wines, because we have a kind of alpine Mediterranean climate. So alpine because we can have heavy snow in winter, we can have pretty cold temperatures. It's 1 degree outside right now, but we have very hot summers. So we have temperatures of around 35, 36, up to 40 degrees every summer, even in the colder summers. And you will find that characteristic again in the wines when we try through them later. So the Cantina Talano was founded in 1893, already focusing on white wines, while the rest of Alto Adige were still focusing for 100 more years on Lagrein and Schiava, the two regional red grapes. And in Talano, they started planting a lot of Pinot Bianco. So we still have some vineyards of Pinot Bianco, which are about 70 and 80 years old. Pretty cool stuff up there. And afterwards, in the 50s, we started focusing also a lot on Sauvignon Blanc. And in the 80s, we finally got to know what was Chardonnay. Before that time, it was called the yellow Burgundy, because nobody had an idea that that was Chardonnay. We called it yellow Burgundy, but now it has a name and it became Chardonnay in the 80s. So I already started pouring the first wine, which is Pinot Bianco, or Weißburgunder, how we call it in that mostly German-speaking region of Italy. The first variety we were focusing on since the 1870s in that area. And here we have the vineyards between about 400 meters up to 900 meters. And that is actually a perfect area because we have very warm days and pretty cold nights. And Pinot Bianco is an area which loves these, is a variety which loves these temperature swings. So you have ripe fruit. It is always a little bit apple-ish and pretty fresh fruit, but it is phenolically ripe. And on the other hand, you have that crisp acidity. That's what I meant when you try this wine now. That's what I meant. It's waking me up at 9 a.m. To be honest, I don't do tastings at 9 a.m. every day, especially not video tastings, because I could do that also on other times. But I thought this is the perfect time today. So you see these two different shaped bottles. That is our tradition quality level, and the Burgundy bottles are our selection level. So tradition quality level usually means younger vineyards. It has nothing to do with supermarket quality or super high yields. Our enologist has 2 words to describe this quality level, and it is pure and honest, because there's no oak influence at all. These wines stay on the fine lees for about 5 months. They stay in the steel tank for about 6 to 7 months, and then they are bottled around February, March, April, and then they are released. Perfect time, perfect wine for the summer. I already poured the second wine, which is the Pinot Grigio, recently the most important variety in Alto-Adige. There are many selections around. Unfortunately, we only have a very small production of Pinot Grigio, so we focus only on the traditional quality level. We've reduced the yields, so it is, I would say, comparable to wines from other wineries from also a little higher quality levels. Reduced yields, pretty good structure, long finish, and that fruity, slightly aromatic nose you are looking for in a Pinot Grigio. It is definitely a wine which screams, pair me to shellfish, spicy food. Maybe that's why it's definitely a wine which we sell a lot to Asian food restaurants or Italian restaurants, because it's perfectly pairable to that kind of cuisine. But whenever you are up to do a fish meat, pair Pinot Bianco, or if it's something a little more structured like salmon, for example, go for Pinot Grigio. The third wine I have here is the Terlan cuvée. It is our historical wine. We still have bottles from 1893 in our cellar. I must confess, I once tried one of these 1893 bottles, which I found half empty on a shelf, and I assumed that it's been there for about 20 years, and I tried it, and it was not good. So go for a younger vintage, or maybe 5 years old, 6 years old, that's still perfect. So Terlan was the first wine we produced in 1893, because at that time we only had 2 wines. Terlan white, Terlan red. Quality orientation was a little bit different at that time, so everything which was harvested as a white wine went into that Terlan cuvée, mostly Pinot Blanc at that time, but many other varieties. And since the 80s, the cuvée remained exactly the same. It is Pinot Blanc for the most part, about 60%, 30% Chardonnay and 10% Sauvignon Blanc. And the idea was to create an elegant wine, so pretty vertical, not too full-bodied, not too fat. And that's why, for the most part, Pinot Bianco, which is the most elegant variety. Then we took a little bit of Chardonnay, which give it a little bit of body, tropical fruit, the banana notes you might get, and a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc. The Sauvignon Blanc just refreshes the whole wine and gives a little touch of aromatic to this cuvée. I always call it my all-round talent, the charmeur, because it's one of the wines which goes with most of different kinds of food, and it is good for every palate because it's definitely not polarizing. Every wine lover finds at least one variety he loves in this wine. And I'm not a big chef, but whatever I cook at home, even if it's fish, white meat, or some vegetarian dish, you can always pair Terlan with that. You taste that it's more structured than the 2 wines we had before, lower yields, a longer finish, and something you might not taste is that we now entered into the quality level where we always use a little bit of oak tanks, oak barrels when we age these wines. For the white wines, we're always talking about huge oak barrels. It is between 3,000 and 7,500 liter barrels, which are very old, so neutral oak. But we want the wines to be able to breathe through the pores of the wine. and to become a little bit creamier when we release them. So both of these wines, Terlan and Winkle, are also released after 6 months on the fine lease, so released pretty fresh. So usually I suggest our customers to wait at least half a year, 3/4 of a year, until they evolve their whole personality. And yeah, still pretty fresh wines selections, but they did not lose their fresh, fruity, honest character, which they had before when they were still in the tradition quality level. The next one is Winkle. Fun fact, it was the first single varietal Sauvignon Blanc of Alto-Adige. First vintage was 1956. Sebastian Stocker, who was one of the core figures in the history of Cantina Terlano, and I would actually say one of the core figures of the history of Alto-Adige wine, came to work at Cantina Terlano in 1955, and then he went to these mixed fields where we had Pinot Blanc growing next to Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, which we found out later, Sylvaner, and many other varieties. And then he started to pick out the Sauvignon Blanc grapes, and he started to produce a single varietal Sauvignon Blanc. And all the other enologists said, "You're totally crazy, because nobody will ever drink single varietal Sauvignon Blanc. They just use Sauvignon Blanc for blends in order to have a little more acidity, a little bit of aromatics." But he loved that variety, vinificated pure. So actually, aging process or vinification process is the same as for the Terlan, fermentation in steel tanks, and then afterwards 30% of the wine aged in big oak barrels and 70% in steel tanks. I always say this Sauvignon Blanc is something for these Sauvignon Blanc lovers who do not want to stick with one growing area. It has a little bit of the aromatics from the Sauvignon Blancs from Friuli. It has a little bit of the fruit from the wines from New Zealand, and it definitely has a very good acidity, which always remembers me of Sancerre. So every Sauvignon Blanc lover finds something he likes in other areas. Last but not least, for the white wines today, Chardonnay Kreut, how we call it. I'm pretty sure you still have vintage 18 in your glass. I already have 19 because 18 unfortunately is totally sold out. Kreut is definitely one of our less famous wines, because most of the people know us for the Sauvignon Blancs, depending on the market, Sauvignon Blancs or Pinot Blancs or the blends. And that Cantina Terlano produces a selection of Chardonnay since the 80s is something many people don't know. It is our definition of an oak-aged Chardonnay for about 8 months, 100% in big oak barrels. So these barrels have a capacity of 7,500 liters and are around 40-50 years old. And that means they're neutral. So when you check the nose, when you check the aromatics of this wine, it's not necessarily that you say, okay, this is an oak-aged Chardonnay. It is a pretty powerful Chardonnay. It is definitely a very mineral Chardonnay. And then it has a very fresh acidity, which makes it a little bit more vertical. So many oak-aged Chardonnays you might know are heavier, even more full-bodied. I don't want to say that this one is not full-bodied or long, but it has a very interesting balance between body, acidity, minerality, and I'm sure you will finish that bottle tonight or today, whenever you opened the bottle. Here you totally get the soil we are working on. Our soil is called porphyric quartz. That's why two of our most famous wines are called Sauvignon Blanc quartz, and Lagrein Reserva Porphyre as a dedication to the soil. It's a volcanic soil which contains a lot of minerals. And that was always very important for our production, because you can imagine in the 50s or 60s a co-op didn't focus a lot on quality, but our wine growers wanted to produce as much as possible. The good thing was that they couldn't, because this mineralic soil is very poor in nutrients. They tried to grow as much as possible, but they had very low yields, and that is why we still have bottles from the 50s and 60s in our cellar, which are still drinkable. Which is something I suggest to you, to store this wine a little bit. Independently, if you have 19, 18 or 17 in your cellar, wait at least 2 years, 3 years, it gets much more interesting. It develops this riper fruit, melon notes, without being oxidated after 5 years. So it's definitely worth it to try this wine, and yeah, definitely pair it to food or take it as a meditational wine, if you want to find an excuse why you just drink a glass of wine without eating anything. You're meditating. The last wine in your tasting package is Lagrein Gris Reserva. Greece is actually the area where I am coming from, and I'm saying this with maybe one smiling eye and one very sad eye, because it is a very hot area. We reach 40 degrees in summer every year, and it can happen sometimes that you cannot fall asleep during the night, and then you wake up, you check the time and it's 1 a.m. and it has still 30 degrees. It is surrounded by mountains, so it is not very ventilated. There's not much air circulating. That means the heat stays there also during the night. We would never think about planting Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Blanc or whatever white grape you have in your mind in that area, but we love to plant Lagrein in this area. And also the old wine growers understood perfectly well that this is the perfect area for Lagrein, a red original variety for the area, which has good tannins, which has a good acidity, and which needs a lot of heat in order to become round enough to be good good to be paired to food, or like not too acidic. And we love the super hot years for Lagrein. If you don't have it in your glass, you can see the beautiful color this wine has. As I said, original grape, and there are many other areas in alto-adige where some wine growers grow Lagrein, but the original area is Gries, which is one part of Bolzano. Powerful, very fruity, pretty spicy red wine. So I like to compare it to an alpine version of Syrah, if somebody doesn't know Lagrein. Maybe a little less fruity, a little less spicy, but I think it's a very good, it's a quite good comparison. And this is the first wine which was aged also in barrique barrels for about 30%. It depends on the vintage, 30 to 50%. The rest of the wine is aged in big oak barrels. And that's what we drink here to meat like game, deer. Right now everybody eats dry aged beef. That's what I love to drink with dry aged beef. Every kind of beef every kind of meat which has a very strong taste on its own. On the other hand, when you chill it down a little bit on a temperature of around 12 degrees maybe, it gets a little less full-bodied, more elegant, and you can drink it also when you do a barbecue in summer. It is not too heavy. I would love to thank you for your attention and for your interest in our wines. I hope that you're very happy with all of these 6 wines you bought, and Please ask your wine shop for my contact if you have any other questions, and if you want to visit Cantina Terlan. I am very happy to see new faces here, and I would be very happy to guide you through the Cantina Terlan, because it's actually a very beautiful building and cellar, built in 1925 and rebuilt in 2009, and it's definitely worth it to come here. Cheers on you guys.